Every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Good morning, this is To The Point on GB News with me, Anaya Flaren Iman and Nurse Maroki on your TV, radio and online.
Yes, and we're here with you until midday again, bringing you the big stories of the day, from the Labour Party conference to a record slump in the pound's value against the dollar to those clashes outside the Iranian Embassy in London.
Indeed, make sure you get in touch with your views as usual, gbviews@gbnews.uk. We'll be getting to those throughout the show, but first it's time for the latest news.
A very good morning. It's just 1 minute past 10. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date today on GB News. The pound slumped to a record low against the dollar, plunging towards parity after the government unveiled its plan to cut taxes. Sterling fell by more than 4% to just $1.03 in early trading this morning before regaining some ground. Well, experts are warning the cost of goods could soar higher, exacerbating the cost of living crisis. The euro also hit a fresh 20-year low amid recession and energy security fears. Well, the Chancellor's hinting that more tax cuts could be on the way. It comes after he was accused of helping the highest earners by scrapping the top rate of tax. Mr Kwarteng denies that, saying that they favour people right across the income scale. Chloe Smith, who's Secretary of State for Work and Pensions, told GB News the UK economy will take to grow.
What you saw in the growth package from the Chancellor last Friday is a really bold and ambitious plan that is all about growth, and I think that's exactly right. And for me, in my particular role, what I'm most focused on is using all of those levers to help people into jobs, and that, I think, is what we all want to see in this country. This will take a little while to come through, and that is because what we're looking for is sustainable growth in the long term.
Labour's Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves is preparing to announce her party's economic plans at their conference in Liverpool later today. Pat McFadden, as Shadow Chief Secretary to the Treasury, told us they'd take a fair approach which won't hurt working people.
I remember we used to talk about levelling up. This is the opposite of levelling up. It is taking from people in my constituency to fund a tax cut for people earning that amount. So we do believe that's wrong, and that's why Keir Starmer came out yesterday and said that's the wrong priority. If we're going to get economic growth in the country, it comes from the efforts of everybody, and that's the way that we should view tax, and that's the way that we should view the fairness in our economy that we need.
Now, some breaking news in the last hour. Russia's Interior Ministry says a gunman has killed 6 people at a school in the city of Ijevsk before turning the gun on himself. At least 20 people have been injured. Security services and ambulance teams are present. As we get more on this developing story, we'll bring it to you here. Now, at least 5 police officers were seriously injured and 12 people were arrested following violent disorder near the Iranian Embassy in London last night. We can find out more now and go live to the embassy. GB News' Home and Security Editor Mark White is there for us. Mark, just bring us up to date with the latest.
Well, the clean-up operation is underway here at the Iranian Embassy. On the facade of that building, there are multiple broken windows, also paint that has been splattered, red paint over a number of areas in the front of that building. The disorder broke out yesterday afternoon after a large demonstration gathered at the front of the embassy, and it descended into very violent chaos. A number of police officers were injured. Metropolitan Police putting the total of seriously injured at 5, who are still in hospital with injuries including broken bones. Now, at this stage, 12 people have been injured, but Scotland Yard say they will be looking through their video evidence and CCTV as well as mobile phone footage to see if they can identify any other people involved in the violence. That violence spread from here down to Marble Arch and then up to the Islamic Centre for England in Maida Vale. We are expecting more protests in the days ahead. They were, of course, sparked by the death of a young woman in Iran, arrested there by the morality police for wearing a veil too loosely. She died in custody. It sparked a wave of violence in Iran and now globally.
Mark, thank you, live at the Embassy for us. Now, 2 teenagers are appearing at Leeds Magistrates Court charged with the murder of a 15-year-old boy. Kyle McLean was stabbed outside his school gates in Huddersfield on Wednesday. Police say the male suspects, aged 15 and 16, have also been charged with possession of a bladed article. Electric car owners have been hit by a 42% rise in the cost of using public rapid charge points in just 4 months. The RAC says it's now nearly £10 more expensive to rapid charge a family-sized electric car to 80%. Their survey of over 12,000 drivers suggests that rising energy prices are putting many people off from switching to an electric vehicle. The far-right party Brothers of Italy is projected to win the Italian election with 26% of the vote, leaving the way clear for a right-wing alliance. Their leader, Giorgia Meloni, will become the country's first female prime minister. She's now calling for unity to help the country face issues, including surging energy prices. This is GB News. I'll bring you more as it happens. Now let's head to the point.
A very good morning. It's 10:07 and this is To The Point on GB News with me, Mercy Moroki, and Inaya Falarian Iman. Here's what's coming up on today's show.
Yes, as the Labour Party conference gets into full swing, we'll bring you the updates on what's been happening so far live from Liverpool with our political correspondent Tom Howard as Labour leader Keir Starmer makes some big policy announcements.
And the pound has fallen to a record low against the dollar after the Chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng announced the biggest tax cuts in 50 years. So what can the market's reactions to this tell us about what we can expect from the economy? That's coming up later.
Yes, and also on the programme, protesters have clashed with police officers during demonstrations outside the Iranian Embassy in London, with some throwing missiles at police officers yesterday afternoon. We discuss the ongoing tensions as protesters campaign for women's rights.
That's all coming up on our programme today, and we have much more as well. And remember, you can get in touch with your views. gbviews@gbnews.uk is the email. We do try and read as many as we can, so get them in.
To our top story, Sir Keir Starmer has kicked off Labour's conference in Liverpool with a string of policy announcements, including the reversal of the cut to the top rate of income tax, which was announced in the Chancellor's mini-budget on Friday.
Yes, well, the Labour leader also unveiled a new strategy to massively expand wind and solar energy in the UK in an attempt to end our dependence on fossil fuels.
Well, our political correspondent Tom Howard joins us now from Liverpool. Thank you so much, Tom, for joining us on the programme. Could you just bring us an update about what has been unfolding in the last couple of days?
Yes, the Labour Party is gathering here in Liverpool, and indeed the conference was kicked off yesterday morning by the Labour Party leader Sir Keir Starmer, first leading a tribute to Her late Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, whom was described by the Labour leader as the greatest monarch in the history of this country. Then, unusually for the Labour Party, they sang the national anthem. That is something that hasn't happened before at a Labour Party conference ever before. But also we of course heard from the deputy leader of the Labour Party, from Angela Rayner, who delivered what was at times a quite funny speech, also highly critical of the Conservative government, really trying to tie in the idea that the Conservatives haven't changed. That'll be a big argument of the Labour Party here, trying to set the narrative that this is 12 years of Conservative Prime Ministers rather than just 2 weeks of this new one. But today things turn to the economy, because we'll be hearing from the Shadow Chancellor, Rachel Reeves. She'll be speaking at midday and no doubt will have a lot to say about the fluctuation of the currency markets overnight. We'll have a lot to say about Labour's approach to tax and spend. Of course, Labour was criticising the level of the tax burden only recently, and yet now is saying that it would want to reverse some of the tax cuts cuts. They'll have to square that circle. There'll also, no doubt, be more announcements on what the Labour Party will do for its own growth plan, because now it seems that both parties are talking about economic growth, something that was sitting on the back burner quite considerably for quite some time, is now at the centre of political discussion. We've heard the Conservative plan to get growth up. It involves supply-side reform and tax cuts. Well, what's the Labour Party plan to get growth up? We may well be hearing a little bit more about that from the Shadow Chancellor later today.
OK, Tom, and just very finally, we mentioned there they've got some big energy announcements. Something tells me people who are sort of struggling with their bills and struggling with the cost of living aren't necessarily too keen on the green agenda at the moment. What can we expect to hear roughly from the Labour Party when they speak on that later?
Yes, we've heard a little trail on energy and particularly on wind and solar. Keir Starmer saying that he wants to double onshore wind, that he wants to quadruple offshore wind and double onshore solar power as well. The pitch of the Labour Party is that's to avoid dependence on foreign despots, that's to avoid dependence on unstable regimes. But of course, the criticism of that is that the wind doesn't always blow and the sun doesn't always shine. These are intermittent sources of energy, and without a sort of base load, without a way to store up that energy for when the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine, it may not be the most sustainable plan. They'll have to answer some of those questions. The other political dynamic here is that it's not the biggest policy in the world. The Conservatives had already committed to zero carbon or low carbon electricity by 2035. The Labour Party is simply saying it wants to get there by 2030 instead. It's not the biggest dividing line here, and I think this is potentially speaking to a lot of what the Labour Party views it needs to do at this conference. Not announce any big agenda-setting, huge policy, but really maintain its lead in the polls by trying to not do what many people might describe as committing too much news.
Yeah, thank you there, Tom. It does look like I think both parties will see at the Labour and Conservative Party conference that they'll be very committed to perhaps not trying to rely so much on foreign gas, for example. So that's probably going to be a theme of all the party conferences.
Well, indeed. Well, here to tell us how Red Wall voters may be responding to these new policy proposals is our Midlands reporter, Will Hollis, who is in fellow GB News presenter Gloria De Piero's old seat, Ashfield. Thank you so much for joining us on the programme. Tell us, what is the sense from the people you've been speaking to in the Red Wall about some of the announcements by the Labour Party?
Yes, well, from Liverpool in the northeast to here in northwest, pardon me, and now we're in the East Midlands here in Ashfield, Sutton in Ashfield, in a fantastic little market here where you can get all your fruit and veg, you can get all your different items that you might need, and you can also get your shoe repairs, because that's where we've come today, because Dave Lee was once actually a Labour voter, and he's exactly the kind of person that Labour needs to convince to vote for them again. In Ashfield, it was about 6,000 votes that they won to give this seat to the Conservative Party. Dave, just in between fixing a shoe, former Labour voter, just to go back, what was it that made you stop voting for Labour and turn to the Conservatives?
For me, it was starting to be more like the Tories in the way that they was giving their policies, and then there was the old anti-Semitism row. So it steered me away from being Labour, and then I voted the Tories basically for Brexit.
Obviously, mining towns like this, not as much investment, levelling up is a big part of the Tories' plan. Yes. What do Labour need to do to win back voters like you that live here? For me, they need to turn into the old party that my granddad and my dad used to vote for, where they're putting money back in the pockets of the working man. Right back when the Labour was founded, it was for the working man. It was to help him live, help him survive, and help him thrive in life, not just struggle to get by as people are now. So for me, they've got to go back to their old roots and start to begin to work for the people more and more. I think what we're going to be hearing today is a little bit about energy, a little bit about investment. Just because energy is the big story at the moment, particularly for businesses, how has it been for you, somebody who's got a lot of machines that you use to repair your shoes?
Yeah, so luckily, being in a council building, our energy is capped at the minute and fixed at a set rate, which we know it is going to double, but it's a really good rate at the minute, so we're not using that much, but I feel for those outside of a place like this that haven't got the cap that we've got, that are struggling day to day. Because once prices start going up and we've got to start putting that on our products, people out there are struggling to pay energy bills at home. Then if we're putting our prices up, then they're going to stop using us and then we're going to struggle. So it has a knock-on effect. So they've got to tackle that at the root. They've got to put that money back in people's pockets so they're not struggling. So they're not deciding, can I eat or can I eat the house for the kids?
And then if there was another election in the next year or the next set general election in the next couple of years, how likely would you be at this point right now to ever go back and vote Labour again?
Well, if we was to vote today, I wouldn't be voting Labour at all, being totally honest. They've got to do an awful lot more of showing that they're not a carbon copy of the Tories. It's easy when you're not in power and saying we'll do this and we'll do that, but the test is showing us what you're going to do, proving the way that you will do stuff, and then once they start proving it and saying, look, this is our roadmap, this is what we're definitely going to do, and sticking by those promises, people will get on board, people will vote for them. And for me, they've got to get to a roadmap where they say, this is how we're going to put money back in your pocket, this is how we're going to help the little people.
Dave, thank you so much. Dave, maybe you'll be showing me how to repair a shoe, but up and down in this market, Idwell's Market in Sutton and Ashfield, we're going to be talking to all of these people about whether they still vote Labour and what it would take from today at the Labour Party conference for them to go back and start voting red again.
Well, Will, thank you so much. Really interesting, always really interesting, listening to somebody who's actually sort of on the ground, who's running a business, who's having to face the facts of everything we talk about. As commentators, journalists and politicians, it's always obviously the ordinary people who are at the brunt of it.
Absolutely. Well, joining us now is Peter Edwards, former editor of Labour List. Thank you for joining us on the programme. I mean, what's your reaction to some of the announcements by the Labour Party? I mean, for the last few years, sometimes it has felt that there hasn't really been an opposition. I mean, do you think that this is Keir Starmer starting to really distinguish himself and his party from the Tories?
Yeah, I'm not sure that critique was quite fair because Keir Starmer had dozens, almost hundreds of policies in the pandemic, but thankfully we're out of lockdowns now and into different territory. I think, take what Keir Starmer announced over the weekend on green energy. I think that was the right thing to do because diversifying the supply will ultimately get household bills down. So that's, if you like, will hopefully start to prove the points for people like Dave, the entrepreneur in Ashfield we just heard from, who said, of course, it's all well and good having the policies, but show us how it will work. Similarly, anything environmental will go down well with the actual membership at a conference and people like me, because we're all environmentalists at heart in the party. And it's also perhaps some more of the difficult, unexciting long-term planning to think, what will our energy need be in the next 10 to 20 years? So I think that's the right thing to do. I'd encourage Labour to have one or two more big announcements this week because, yes, I think Keir Starmer is a world away from Jeremy Corbyn and is seen as a potential Prime Minister, but he now needs to build up the whole shadow cabinet with a range of really economic and life-changing policies across the different departments.
And on that, do you not think that his shadow cabinet, as it currently stands then, is particularly impressive then? Because they're not very well known, I suppose, by most ordinary people. You do have Angela Rayner as deputy, you do have Wes Streeting, who's emerging as a big figure. But do you think they need bigger characters who people can actually identify with Labour and Labour policies?
Well, I think they're serious characters in their own right. Rachel Reeves, a former economist, you could say, given that the economic crisis we have and then the turmoil in the pound over the last 2 working days since the mini budget, having the Economist as shadow chancellor is the right person for the right job. I think Angela Rayner and Wes Streeting are fantastic communicators. So I think having people that are serious and know their policy is absolutely fine. Obviously, we've just seen the back of a Prime Minister in Boris Johnson who was a character, but notoriously didn't do the detail. So I'm quite happy with Shadow Cabinet, but ultimately it is a team sport. And that's There are many different reasons why Labour won, the Tories lost in 97. But having a strong team, we think not just Blair and Bound, but the late Robin Cook, the late Mo Molam, Claire Short, the late Donald Dewar, there was a broad pool of talent. And I think it's a good shadow cabinet, but I'd encourage them all to get themselves in front of the camera this week and set out for people like Dave in Ashfield how they're going to change their businesses and change their lives.
Yeah, I mean, don't you think that the Labour Party should be far further ahead at this point? I mean, we've had a pandemic, we're in a cost of living crisis, we've gotten rid of a Prime Minister, and many people think that, the Prime Minister we have now hasn't necessarily been voted for. There's big open goals there, it seems, for the Labour Party, but they're just not really making the kinds of headway that perhaps you'd expect at this point.
I'm not too worried about that. Labour has been around about 10 points ahead in the polls, and yes, they need to do better, but I think all the polling over the summer has been essentially a bit of a chimera, because we were in the dying days of Boris Johnson, and then he was serving out, if you like, his resignation notice. So there was almost a non-Prime Minister. Similarly, for quite understandable reasons, Liz Truss went very slow on political announcements because of the sad passing of the Queen. So it's only now, at the end of September and the start of October, that we'll get an idea of what Liz Truss plans to do. Friday was a shocker for all sorts of reasons, including the inequality of the bankers' tax cut. But I think let's see where the polls are in the autumn and by Christmas, because then that will be our first taste of a Truss-Starmer matchup, which we've not had so far.
Well, thank you so much for joining us this morning, Peter Edwards, former editor of Labour List. We, of course, will be bringing you all the shenanigans of the Labour Party conference as the day goes on. I think what will be interesting to hear is that, if you're somebody who is a low earner, you're looking at the Conservatives at the moment and you're saying, OK, they've reduced the threshold for income tax slightly, they've scrapped the rise to national insurance, that's reversed. You will be slightly better off, especially once the cap in energy bills come forward. So it'd be interesting to see what exactly Labour are putting forward that goes above and beyond that, whilst also being costed and being feasible. Yeah. Because those are essentially Labour policies. They wanted that cap on energy bills. They want a higher, poorer people to keep more of their own money. So, what else can they give that the Conservatives aren't?
Well, exactly. I mean, they don't necessarily seem to have a consistent line on this. They were saying that the tax burden was too high, and now they want to reverse some of the tax changes that this government wants to bring in. They need to be able to significantly distinguish themselves if they are to challenge Liz Truss in a couple of years, who seems very confident, very passionate, and clearly backed by a particular ideology. So we'll have to see this unfold. And there
is a question as to whether she's backed by the markets, and some would say it doesn't appear to be so, because the pound has fallen to the lowest level against the dollar since records began. So could Friday's so-called mini budget be to blame? That's what we'll be discussing with our resident economist Liam Halligan after this weather.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
to each and every one of you
for helping our great nation
find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England, Scotland,
Wales and Northern Ireland.
On TV,
on radio and online.
We're proud to be
the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flock at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Good morning, it's 10:25 a.m. This is To The Point on GB News with me, Anaya Falarin-Iman and Mercy Maroki. We're live on your TV, online and radio.
Yes, and now news coming this morning. The pound plunged to a record low against the dollar in overnight trading, falling to $1.03 to the pound.
Well, sterling did claw back some ground, rising to around 1.05 to the pound. The euro also hit a 20-year low against the dollar on Friday.
Yes, well, this all comes as Chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng announced the biggest tax cut in half a century in his so-called mini-budget, which he delivered on Friday.
Joining us now is business and economics editor Liam Halligan. Thank you so much for joining us, Liam. Firstly, what is driving this slump? Because it obviously did come amid the budget, and some people are blaming Kwasi Kwarteng. But as we've also said in the introduction, we are seeing the euro at a 20-year low too.
Three things are driving this, Anaya. The first thing is that the dollar, the US currency, is getting much, much stronger. That's because there's lots of geopolitical concerns around the world. The dollar acts as a safe haven. And the Federal Reserve, the central bank of the US, they're increasing interest rates very, very sharply, a lot more sharply than us. A second reason the pound has lost value is because last week on Thursday, seems a long time ago now, the Bank of England raised interest rates, but it only raised interest rates by 50 basis points, or 0.5%, whereas the markets were expecting a bigger 0.75 percentage point rise. And the third reason, there can be no denying it, is that global investors were taken aback by the scale of the tax cuts that Chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng put on the table on Friday. The sense is that the British government may be overreaching. It may have to borrow more than was expected. The cost of that borrowing then goes up, something called the gilt yield. That's the interest rate in the market that the government lends money out at, that the government has to offer investors. So for those reasons, the pound is going down, the cost of borrowing for the government is going up. Now, this sounds all a bit otherworldly, but the point is, if the pound is weak against the dollar, and you just said there it went down to $1.03, it's now back up about $1.08 when I last looked a couple of moments ago, but that's down from $1.40 this time last year, so it's lost getting on for 25% of its value. If the pound gets weak, our imports get a lot more expensive. So pretty much everything that we import, and we import a lot of food into this country, in particular we import lots of energy, all that gets more expensive. So when you hear that the pound is getting weaker, that generally means the cost of living squeeze gets tighter, and that's why in the end, if the pound continues to get weak, the Bank of England is going to have to do something about it. And the only thing they can do is raise interest rates even more to try and attract people across the world to buy the pound. As I say, these are quite difficult concepts, but the main point here is that a weaker pound means a tighter cost of living squeeze.
And Kwasi Kwarteng, the Chancellor, has already responded this morning and has inevitably downplayed the market's reaction so far. He's saying, this isn't something to worry about too much. Do you think this is something that the government and the Chancellor would have expected to happen, and they would have almost factored this into what they see as a long-term economic plan?
They would have expected some weakness of the pound. I mean, look, when I was presenting the mini-budget programme on Friday with Alistair Stewart, in the first couple of hours, the pound actually strengthened. But as international investors digested the scale of the tax cuts, then it started to get weaker. I don't think anybody in the government would have foreseen that people would be talking today at the Labour Party conference about the pound going all the way down to parity with the dollar. $1 equals up £1. That's never actually happened before. And I think ministers will be sweating. They will be concerned, even if they don't admit it. Of course they're not going to admit it, because then financial markets could sense their panic and pile in even more. I think the big issue today, as what's going on currency and financial markets completely dominates the politics of what's going on here. Labour are saying that the government's economic incompetence and overreach and ideologically driven tax cuts are causing this problem. The big question today is whether or not the Bank of England, which is independent of the government, can do what it wants, moves to implement an emergency interest rate rise in order to try and shore up the pound, to strengthen the pound. Now, if that happens, people with a variable rate mortgage, people with personal debts, companies with variable rate debts, they will have to pay more for that debt. So it's not something that the Bank of England will do lightly, not least because the Bank of England raised interest rates only last Thursday, and not by as much as many people expected, so it will be them admitting a mistake as well. But if the Bank of England does feel that this run on the pound or a weakening of the pound has gone too far, we could yet see an emergency interest rate cut, interest rate rise, today or in the next few days. Now, I think we're some way away from that. The pound has gained in the last couple of hours. We're back at $1.08, so all the losses overnight have been reversed. But it's something that's on the mind very much of every single member of the government.
Thank you so much for bringing us that economics update, Leon Halligan, our business and economic editor. And, you know, it is varying very rapidly, but it doesn't seem to be very reassuring for most ordinary people, because I remember back in my day when the pound was almost $2.
Oh, I remember that too.
It was a cheap holiday to go to America.
Absolutely, it was. I mean, the City AM, which is London's business paper, is just reporting a couple of minutes ago. They say the Bank of England needs to hike interest rates by the greatest amount in its independence this week in an emergency meeting to drag the pound from its record low. That's what they're reporting. So a very real prospect we're facing now of interest rates being hiked once again, which will not be welcome news at all to people who have mortgages, for example, and who are already seeing those monthly payments. So lots to analyse there, but we will bring you all the updates, of course, as always on GB News.
Yes, well, after the break, anti-Iranian protests have spilled out across London, leading to a dozen arrests. But what are these people protesting for? We'll look more just after the headlines.
A very good morning. It's 10:32. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date on GB News. The pound slumped to a record low against the dollar, plunging towards parity after the government unveiled its plan to cut taxes. Sterling fell in the early hours of this morning by more than 4% to just $1.03. It regained some ground earlier this morning. Experts are warning goods could become even more expensive, exacerbating the cost of living crisis. The Chancellor's hinting that more tax cuts could be on the way. Labour has accused the government of helping higher earners and recklessly gambling with the UK's finances. But Work and Pensions Secretary Chloe Smith told GB News it's a good plan and growing the economy will take time.
What you saw in the growth package from the Chancellor last Friday is a really bold and ambitious plan that is all about growth, and I think that's exactly right. And for me, in my particular role, what I'm most focused on is using all of those levers to help people into jobs, and that, I think, is what we all want to see.
At least 5 police officers were seriously injured and 12 people were arrested following violent disorder near the Iranian Embassy in London last night. Rival groups clashed at a protest calling for an end to the Islamic Republic of Iran. It had been sparked by the death of Mahsa Amini, who died in custody in Iran after being arrested for not completely covering her hair. Shiva Mabobi is a spokesperson for the campaign to free political prisoners in Iran. She says it's time for change. The far-right party Brothers of Italy is projected to win the Italian election with 26% of the vote, leaving the way clear for a right-wing alliance. Their leader, Giorgia Meloni, will become the country's first female prime minister. She's now calling for unity to help the country face issues, including surging energy prices. We're on your TV, online and DAB+ radio. This is GB News. Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.078 and 1.112 euros. The price of gold currently stands at £1,526 and 65 pence per ounce.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
To each and every one of you.
for helping our great nation
Find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
across England, Scotland,
Wales and Northern Ireland.
On TV,
on radio and online.
We're proud to be
The People's Channel.
Britain's
news channel.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flop at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club. Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
It's 10:37. This is To The Point on GB News with me, Anaya Flaren Iman and Mercy Muroki. We're live on your TV, online and radio this morning.
Now, 12 people were arrested last night following clashes with police during a demonstration outside the Iranian Embassy in London.
Yes, the protesters are part of a global wave of condemnation of the Iranian regime after a young woman, Mahsa Amini, died after being arrested by the country's morality police for supposedly not covering her hair with a headscarf properly.
Yes, well, our Home and Security editor, Mark White, is at the Iranian Embassy now. Good morning, Mark. So tell us a bit more about why these protests erupted yesterday.
Well, really sparked by the death of this young woman, of course, in Iran, which has seen not just protests right across Iran, but in a number of other countries, including, of course, here in the UK, in London, outside the embassy. I'm just going to pop to the side for a second, let Alex get a shot of the front of the embassy building there. You can see the clean-up operation is getting underway today. It's very peaceful here now. They are going to try to repair the windows and clean off the paint from the front of that building, as that was the scene of a number of sort of missiles and paint bombs that were thrown at the front of the building. At the same time, of course, the police were coping with significant violence, serious disorder on the ground as they tried to hold back a crowd of several hundred people who had walked here from Trafalgar Square. And really during the violence, we're told by the police that a number of officers were injured, including 5 who were seriously injured. They are still in hospital suffering from injuries, including broken bones. Now, the protest itself, about 7:30 last night, dissipated from this area, moved to Marble Arch, where there were more scuffles. Police used public order equipment, helmets and shields to try and push the crowd back. Then the disorder moved to Maida Vale, to the Islamic Centre for England, a Shia Islamic centre up there, where more disorder took place. Masonry, bottles and other projectiles thrown towards that building, and of course at the police as well. Now, the police have condemned, understandably, the violence. They believe that there was a significant level of orchestration amongst this protest, with those not in charge, but groups there who were inciting and orchestrating the violence. The London Mayor Sadiq Khan has also condemned this. He said it was a minority of troublemakers who really turned what was a peaceful protest into a very violent protest. And there is obviously concern for the days ahead, because we are expecting that there's likely to be more protests here at the Iranian Embassy.
Very much, Mark White, our Home and Security Editor, bringing us an update on the protests and the clashes that unfolded over the weekend outside the Iranian Embassy.
Yes, well, joining us now to discuss this further is Catherine Perez-Shakdam, who's a research fellow and expert on Iran. Really appreciate you coming on this morning. So just talk to us about this particular issue with this morality police, and is this something that has been bubbling up for a long time?
Absolutely. Look, when the Islamic Republic, came to be in 1979, Ayatollah Khomeini back then decided that he wanted to make the hijab, the headscarf, mandatory onto women, and he passed on a law that would basically oblige women, and if not, to be passible of 72 lashes, so corporal punishment. He then decided to establish, this morality police, whose job is to basically go around the streets of Iran and to call on women should they not be keeping to the very strict standard of the Islamic Republic when it comes to wearing the veil. Even though things more or less got a little bit more relaxed over the years because people were calling for reform and the regime was not too interested in enforcing that rule, since President Raisi came to power, he decided to revert the Republic back to its early days and to enforce a very strict interpretation of Shia Islam onto women and force them to basically disappear completely and rob them from the choice of religious freedom or even, the personal choice to wear what they wish. And I think that in the face of, absolute crippling poverty and violent repression and the possibility of imprisonment, should they even take to Twitter or social media or the streets to express, their desire for change, Iranian, I think, just decided that it was time for the regime to go. And what you see in the streets right now, not just in London, but in Iran and across the world for that matter, is absolute unfettered rage. It's 40 years of, bubbling up. It's 40 years of brutal oppression, of people losing their lives, over mere words, of people being accused of waging a war against God should they decide to speak against the regime and actually make political comments against the regime as opposed to religious comments. This level of oppression is unparalleled and I think unheard of. And what you see in the streets is the Iranian telling the world that they've had enough, they can't take it anymore. Whatever they were willing to cede has been ceded. Whatever ground they were willing to give up to the regime has been given up. And in the face of young women being shot dead in the streets of Iran, they can't take it anymore. And they decided to move and make their voices heard.
And, we must say that 41 people have actually been killed in the protests in Iran in just the last 10 days alone. So it is seriously getting quite violent. I mean, what do you make of the international reaction? Because some people have expressed concern that there has not necessarily been strong statements of condemnation or international solidarity shown in its most strongest forms. Or what do you think?
I do agree with that statement. I think it's a pity that, Western capitals, for example, are not coming a lot stronger in their statement in condemnation of the Islamic Republic and, President Raisi's decision to actually be, to show no mercy. Those were his words, no mercy to protesters. In the face of peaceful protest, they have been met with, violence and cannons and bloodshed. And so, of course, people, turn violent, but you can't, I'm not making an excuse for violence, but one needs to understand that one once is fighting for his life or her life. They need to protect themselves, and self-defense is actually an inherent right. The problem, I believe, has a lot to do with desire that Western capitals have had to sign the JCPOA and to, definitely lock this nuclear deal that they want to see happen, in the belief that by appeasing the regime in Iran, they might be able to, enforce reform and force the Islamic Republic to somewhat become less dangerous and less violent against its people and less fascist, maybe. I think it's folly. I don't think it will happen. They have literally conducted hostage diplomacy when it comes to, negotiating with our Western capitals. Salman Rushdie was stabbed just a month ago. John Bolton was threatened with his life. We know that to be true, and it was coming out of the regime of Iran. We have said and done nothing to ensure that such acts of violence will never happen again. We have offered no form of real deterrent other than sanctions, which are harming the people. It's a very complicating affair in my mind, and the way I personally look at it, if we were capable of standing up for Ukraine against the assault of Russia, then one needs to ask, why is it that our capitals cannot extend the same courtesy to the people of Iran in standing up for them and offering them the courtesy of their revolution and the rights that they're demanding, which is basically democracy, secularism, and free choice.
Yeah. Well, Catherine, look, this story is obviously not going away immediately, and it'd be great to have you on another time as it develops. Thank you so much for joining us, Catherine Perez-Shak down there, research fellow and expert on Iran.
I show pretty much unconditional solidarity to those Iranian women who are unbelievably courageous and brave, risking their lives.
Literally risking their lives.
Absolute basic rights to, decide what you want to wear, to say the
least. And that's what feminism should be about, really, and not all the other ridiculous things we see these days.
Oh, it's so true.
Yeah, well, let's speak about back here at home, what Prime Minister Liz Truss is preparing to do, because it's reported she wants to increase immigration to fill job vacancies and boost economic growth.
Well, reports claim the Prime Minister plans to raise the number of workers allowed to enter the UK in order to fill the shortages in certain sectors like agriculture and engineering.
Yes, well, these proposals are reportedly facing resistance from Cabinet Brexiteers, including the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, and the Trade Secretary, Kemi Badenoch, according to the Sunday Times.
Well, joining us now is immigration lawyer Yvonne Sampson. Thank you for joining us on the programme. Liz Truss, she wants to distinguish herself as her new position as Prime Minister. And if there are shortages and a desire to boost economic growth, and she believes that immigration would be the answer to that, what's the problem?
Well, the problem is over the last 10 years, the successive Conservative governments have done exactly the opposite, where they've tried to reduce net migration, and they saw that as a vote winner. It was at the expense of the UK economy. And so I welcome Liz Truss's change of heart. I think it's recognised right the way through industry that we don't have enough skilled workers or even unskilled workers in the agricultural industry. They can take a number of measures to make it easier and cheaper. I'll give you an example. I recently advised a CEO of a national carrier airline. And to bring him and his family over, it cost £25,000 in Home Office fees. The lawyers do most of the work, and the Home Office tick their boxes to make sure everything's in order. So they can certainly reduce the fees for employers to bring migrant workers. Secondly, it takes 8 weeks to be granted a sponsor license in order to recruit a migrant worker. All the checks can be done online, and they can significantly reduce that to a matter of a few days to make it easier. So I think there's lots of things they can do.
Yeah, we don't have too much time, and I'm sure we'll have you on again, but I do wonder whether the main problem at the heart of this policy, so to speak, is that she can't necessarily sell it to the British people, many of whom voted to leave the European Union, many of whom are pro reducing immigration numbers altogether. So if you were trying to sell it to those people, how would you do it? Because lots of people won't take those logical arguments. They'll just have that emotive desire to reduce immigration.
Yes, I know, but you've got to make a distinction between those that are skilled workers and those that are not, that we don't need. For example, we don't have many Jeff Bezoses, we don't have an Elon Musk, we don't have a Google or a Microsoft. And the whole point of immigration is to bring the very best to the UK, to nurture them. So when they come here to study, to their degrees or master's degree, we should endeavour to keep them here and develop skilled foreign workers. You're extending your pool talent. Surely you want the brightest and the best working in the UK. And so the pool talent is the world. The UK is still, I believe, the number one choice for migrants wishing to leave their country and work elsewhere. With that in mind, we should welcome them and make it as easy as possible for both employers and applicants to come to the UK. It's in our interest. It's in our economic interest.
Okay, well, thank you for sharing your thoughts on that, Ivan Sampson, immigration lawyer. I mean, my views are, just very quickly, that I think we have to question an economic model that continually relies on importing people from other countries in order to fill gaps in our market. I mean, what happened to training people in our own country? And to me, that was part of what Brexit was about in terms of taking back control.
Yeah, but I do think, if somebody's skilled and we need that person, I'm talking about a doctor, for example, I don't see the downsides of allowing somebody who is highly skilled and who can support the economy and the welfare state and make a net positive contribution. I don't see the problem of allowing such a person to come to the UK. But anyway, get your thoughts in GBViews at gbnews.uk. Now, of course, the royal family's mourning period ends today, a week after Her Majesty's, the Queen's funeral, while King Charles III had decreed that the family would observe an extra week of mourning when he was decreed king on the 9th of September, the day after Elizabeth II died.
Well, here to tell us what that means is our royal reporter, Cameron Walker. Thank you so much for joining us on the programme, Cameron. Could you just elaborate for our viewers?
Yes, Anaya. Well, royal mourning is continuing, but today is its final day, and tomorrow morning the flags above royal residences will return to full mast. Of course, at the moment they are at half-mast, but you might remember over the national mourning period, thousands of people came to London to lay flowers in Green Park and in Hyde Park to pay their personal respects to Her Majesty the Queen. People had travelled for miles, actually, in order to lay flowers and pay their own personal tributes. At one point, there was so many Paddington Bears and so many marmalade sandwiches that people were told not to bring any more because there was simply too many. But as the royal mourning period ends, the clean-up operation begins. Now, behind me, there are several staff and volunteers who are starting to clean up the flowers in Green Park, separating the flowers from the plastics, from the cards and the toys which have all been left. And those flowers are going to be turned into compost. They're going to be put on a cart pulled by 2 Shire horses, and they're going to be taken to Kensington Gardens, where there's a big kind of compost facility going on. So Heath and Nobby are what the horses are called. They're both senior grade, aged 17 and 14, and they stand at 18.3 hands high, and they're going to be they'll pull a flatbed drays, a traditional kind of working dray used in conservation work across the royal parks. So this compost will be used across the parks to support next spring's bedding, perhaps breathing new light and new life into the royal parks following the death of Her Majesty the Queen.
Well, thank you, Cameron. It looks, I can still see those tributes there behind you, and they do look beautiful. Thank you, Cameron. The official mourning period has now come to an end for the royal family. They observed a week longer than the nation.
Yes, well, just on another quite interesting story that we think would get a lot of people talking, a Canadian high school has sparked outrage over their decision to defend a transgender teacher who has gone viral for wearing enormous prosthetic breasts whilst teaching students.
Yes, well, viral photos and videos of the teacher, who calls themselves Kayla Lemino, shows them wearing bike shorts, a blonde wig, and tight tops over abnormally large prosthetic breasts in the classroom. Our TV viewers can see that teacher there. Look it up online if you haven't seen it. Well, in response to the controversy, Oakville Trafalgar High School in Ontario says it's committed to, quote, establishing and maintaining a safe, caring, inclusive, equitable and welcoming learning environment and working environment.
Indeed. Well, Miranda Yardley is a human rights activist and joins us now. Thank you for joining us on the programme. Sorry, Miranda, we don't have a lot of time, but just, I'm going to be honest here. I think it is, morally reprehensible to have a teacher, male or female, but in this instance, a male wearing abnormally large prosthetic breasts to students when they're meant to be learning. And the response from the school is to defend their so-called gender identity and expression. I mean, this is wrong and ridiculous, surely.
Yes, it's quite interesting that not many people seem to have picked up on the underlying problem with this, in that the individual concerned who is acting out this fantasy, for that is exactly what he is doing. He has become the image of what he thinks a woman should be, and he's getting a thrill out of it, a sexual thrill out of it on some level. And there is an issue here for the students, obviously, who are being used as props within this fantasy, and there is no consent. There is only coercion, that they have to accept what the teacher is doing. I mean, this is, when you analyse this properly in the context of what the teacher is actually doing, this is the epitome of what the word problematic was invented for.
See us getting, I know this is in Canada, but do you see the West getting to a place where leaders will be able to say, actually, no, we're not going to tolerate this at all, and we're going to make it completely unacceptable, and people will lose their jobs if they continue doing what many consider abhorrent things, such as sexualising a classroom?
Well, it's quite interesting that Canada seems to have gone down this particular avenue of encoding the support of gender identity and gender expression, i.e. basically men enacting sexualized stereotypes of women and protecting it under law. There was somebody from the school board who was videoed recently defending this individual, saying that, well, it's their gender identity, we don't discriminate on the basis of the gender identity, and corrected the journalist who was speaking to him, saying, well, it's a she, the individual concerned is a she, not a he. I mean, this really is the this really is the natural end point at where this type of legislation ends up. If you start encoding stereotypes as being woman, this is where it's going to end up. And here we have a man enacting his own idea about what a woman should be. And, we need to ask ourselves, where has he got the idea from that that is what a woman is? Where has he found that? And I think that with a little bit of thought, we can probably work it out.
Well, thank you so much, Miranda Yardley, human rights activist, for sharing your thoughts. I have to say, I completely agree. I think it's morally reprehensible. I think it's sickening that the school has defended him. And if we are getting to the point where we cannot say that an adult, as you said, sexualising the classroom without the consent of children in the name of gender identity and expression is wrong, then we are in a very, very worrying place as a society.
Yeah, I'm sure you guys have lots to say about this, so get your views in our inbox, gbviews@gbnews.uk, and we'll discuss that a bit more later when we're reading out some of your views. But for now, we're going to take a short break, and we'll be back in just a moment.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
to each and every one of you
for helping our great nation
find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England, Scotland,
Wales and Northern Ireland.
On TV,
on radio
and online.
We're proud to be
the People's Channel,
Britain's
news channel.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flop at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club. Oh my goodness. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Good morning. This is To The Point on GB News with me, Mercy Moroki, and Inaya Falarin Iman on your TV, radio and online.
Yes, we are with you for another hour until midday, bringing you the biggest stories and lots of expert guests and your views as well as ours.
Yes, and to get them in, you can email them in at gbviews@gbnews.uk. Lots of views coming in, especially on that trans story we were just discussing. If you missed it, do stay tuned. We'll be talking about that a bit more later on. But first is your latest headlines with Rosie.
A very good morning to you. It's just 1 minute past 11. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date on GB News. The pound slumped to a record low against the dollar, plunging towards parity after the government unveiled its plan to cut taxes. Sterling fell by more than 4% to just $1.03 in early trading, before then regaining some ground. Experts are warning goods could become even more expensive, exacerbating the cost of living crisis. The euro also hit a fresh 20-year low amid recession and energy security fears. The Chancellor's hinting that more tax cuts could be on the way. Labour's accused the government of helping higher earners and recklessly gambling with the UK's finances. While defending the plan, the Work and Pensions Secretary, Chloe Smith, told GB News growing the economy will take time.
What you saw in the growth package from the Chancellor last Friday is a really bold and ambitious plan that is all about growth, and I think that's exactly right. And for me, in my particular role, what I'm most focused on is using all of those levers to help people into jobs, and that, I think, is what we all want to see.
The Shadow Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, is going to outline her economic plan at the Labour conference in Liverpool at lunchtime today. The Shadow Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Pat McFadden, says his party would take a fair approach which won't hurt working people.
I remember we used to talk about levelling up. This is the opposite of levelling up. It is taking from people in my constituency to fund a tax cut for people earning that amount. So we do believe that's wrong, and that's why Keir Starmer came out yesterday and said that's the wrong priority. If we're going to get economic growth in the country, it comes from the efforts of everybody, and that's the way that we should view tax, and that's the way that we should view the fairness in our economy that we need.
In some other news now, at least 5 police officers were seriously injured and 12 people have been arrested following violent disorder near the Iranian Embassy in London last night. Rival groups clashed at a protest calling for an end to the Islamic Republic of Iran. It was sparked by the death of 22-year-old Masha Amini, who died in custody in Iran after being arrested for not completely covering her hair. Shiva Mabobi is a spokesperson for the campaign to free political prisoners in Iran. She says it's time for change.
There is a government that people has never wanted this government. So that's really important. It will change. the regime will be overthrown. But no revolution has happened overnight. I think the point is now that people are putting their life in danger and they're saying we had enough. This time we have to end it and finish it. And we never ever had this type of support around the world from an individual.
2 teenagers are appearing at Leeds Magistrates Court charged with the murder of a 15-year-old boy. Kieran McLean was stabbed outside his school gates in Huddersfield on Wednesday. Police say the male suspects, aged 15 and 16, have also been charged with possession of a bladed article. Russia's Interior Ministry says a gunman has killed at least 13 people at a school in the city of Ijevsk before turning the gun on himself. Investigators previously said a gunman had killed 9, including 5 children, at the school before committing suicide. At least 20 people were injured. Security services and ambulance teams are present. We'll bring you more on this developing story as we get it. Now to Italy, and the far-right party Brothers of Italy is projected to win the Italian election with 26% of the vote. That will leave the way clear for a right-wing alliance. Well, their leader, Giorgia Meloni, will become the country's first female prime minister. She's now calling for unity to help the country face issues, including surging energy prices. Well, electric car owners here have been hit by a 42% rise in the cost of using public rapid charge points in just 4 months. The RAC says it's now nearly £10 more expensive to rapid charge a family-sized electric car to 80%. Their survey of over 12,000 drivers suggests that rising energy prices are putting many people off from switching to an electric vehicle. Thousands of college lecturers and staff in England have started a 10-day strike over pay. The union says the level of industrial action being undertaken is unprecedented in England. They're saying the 2.5% pay offer doesn't cover employees' costs. Around 4,000 members of the University and College Union at 29 colleges in England are taking part. NASA will crash a probe into an asteroid later to test its capabilities. While the space rock being targeted isn't a threat to Earth, the DART, or the Double Asteroid Redirection Test, hopes to see if it can prevent any cosmic doomsday collision. It's the first ever attempt to do so using kinetic impact. The probe lifted off in November last year and has been travelling towards its target ever since. This is GB News, and I'll bring you more as it happens. Now let's head back to the point.
A very good morning. This is To The Point on GB News with me, Mercy Moroki, and Inaya Falarin Iman on your TV, radio and online. We've got another hour lined up for you. Here's what's coming up.
Yes, as the Labour Party conference gets into full swing, we'll bring you updates on what's been happening so far live from Liverpool with our political correspondent Tom Harwood, and as Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer prepares to make some big policy announcements.
Yes, and right-wing leader Giorgia Meloni has claimed victory in Italy's election and is on course to become the country's first female prime minister. We speak to Professor Matt Goodwin to analyse whether widespread claims she's Italy's most far-right leader since Mussolini are indeed justified.
The average price tag on a home in Britain has increased by just over £2,500 compared to this time last year, according to Rightmove. This comes as the Bank of England increased interest rates, pushing monthly tracker mortgage payments up by £210. We'll speak live to a property expert about what this means for mortgages.
Yes, that's all coming up and much more as well across the programme. And get in touch with your views, GBviews at gbnews.uk. We're going to go to those very shortly in this hour, so stay tuned for that.
Now to our top story. Sir Keir Starmer has kicked off Labour's conference in Liverpool with a string of policy announcements, including a reversal of the cut to the top rate of income tax announced in the Chancellor's mini-budget just on Friday.
Yes, well, the Labour leader also unveiled a new strategy to massively expand wind and solar energy in the UK in an attempt to end the dependence on fossil fuels.
Yes, well, let's speak to our political correspondent, Tom Harwood, who will bring us the latest of what has been unfolding. Please tell us, Tom, what have you heard over the last day?
Well, so far today there's been a speech already by the Shadow Transport Secretary, and Labour has, within that speech, made some new announcements. The Labour Party has committed itself to nationalise the trains in this country, but also to build what they describe as an Elizabeth line for the north. They've also committed to back HS2 and HS3. So lots of spending commitments in and around that transport speech. But the big set piece thing today is, of course, the Shadow Chancellor's speech. Rachel Reeves will be taking to the main stage at Labour Party conference here in Liverpool at midday, where we'll hear a bit more about Labour's plan for the economy, for growth and for tax and spend. No doubt we'll hear some words to do with inflation as well, because clearly what we're seeing today in the volatility of the markets is a big focus on that growth package that was announced by the Chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng on Friday. How will Labour respond? We've already heard one or two tidbits that the Labour Party opposes the abolition of that additional rate of tax, the 45p in the pound tax band, but they've also said that they would want to keep the tax cut, the 1p tax cut, to the lowest rate. So a policy mix there. Where there's less clarity is what the Labour Party would do around the corporation tax rise cancellation. There's still some ambiguity there, and in other areas of policy. Hopefully we'll get some more clarity through the Shadow Chancellor's speech a little bit later today. And then it's tomorrow that we hear from Sir Keir Starmer, where he'll be really wrapping up what Labour are trying to make a relatively uneventful conference. One spanner in the works there, however, might be a motion from the constituency Labour parties to be debated on the floor of this conference, where 60% of constituency Labour parties want the party to back proportional representation and abolish first past the post. The party leadership has been saying that they don't want to do that. Sir Keir Starmer doesn't see it as a priority. To what extent will this overshadow what Labour wants to be a less than eventful conference, to try and not move the needle too much, to sit happy where they are and not risk committing news? Well, that remains to be seen.
Well, Tom, thank you. I know you'll be keeping on top of everything that's happening in that party conference today. We are expecting some big announcements from the Labour leader, Keir Starmer, as we mentioned there, and we'll be bringing you those live here on GB News.
Lots of spending commitments, infrastructure projects and so on. So it is interesting to see Liz Truss and Keir Starmer slowly but surely distinguishing themselves from one another, because as I said in the last hour, it did seem during the pandemic that there wasn't really any opposition.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that Labour have very much, or to the Conservatives, have now given Labour lots of ammunition, because as we're seeing this morning and over the last few days, the markets have not responded well to those announcements that the Chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng announced on Friday, those massive tax cuts. There's obviously lots of uncertainty as to what that's going to do for the economy. And the pound has plummeted against the dollar. And to be fair, so has the euro. But you know, this is going to give Labour lots of ammunition. They're going to say, see, look, you're trashing the economy as we speak, and you're giving, you know, rich people tax cuts. That's how they're going to frame it.
Yeah, and it is an interesting one that Kwasi Kwarteng did choose that policy in relation to the top rate of tax. I mean, the top rate of tax doesn't actually bring in a significant amount of money. This is only 2 billion compared to, I think, 900 billion that brings in terms of income tax. But I do think it was something that could be easy for the Labour Party to say, oh, well, you're just helping your rich friends, even if that's not necessarily the case. Obviously, Kwasi Kwarteng will say that this will encourage investors, encourage innovation, show that Britain's open for business. But when it comes to optics, I don't know if it works very well in that.
Yeah, well, but it might work very well for some of their donors, I suppose, and some of the more wealthier people who support the Conservatives disproportionately, perhaps, who knows. But of course, they also have lots of working class people on low incomes who they need to please before the next election as well. But let's go now to Will Hollis, our reporter Will Hollis, because the Labour Party is looking to win back trust in those so-called red wall seats, and voters in constituency like Ashfield in Nottinghamshire, where Will is, turned to the Tories in the last general election. Well, Will is our East Midlands reporter, and he joins us now to talk to us. So you've been speaking to local business owners there. Are they fussed much about the Labour Party conference? Are they keen to hear what Keir Starmer has to say?
Yeah, well, people are going about their day. They're coming to the cafe here at Idlewells Market in Sutton and Ashfield, in the biggest town in this Ashfield constituency. People are going about their day. They're not necessarily keeping up with it completely. They've got other things to do, but they are conscious of what they're going to be hearing from the Labour Party, because, of course, this is an area where most people would have usually voted for the Labour Party because it's a mining community. But last time, in the last general election, 2019, 6,000 vote majority went towards the Conservative Party. So there's lots of people that have changed their votes, changed their mind. A couple of the people who are working here right now are Paige and Rachel. You work in shops right next to each other. Paige, you haven't changed your vote. You've decided to stick with the Labour Party. Why is the Labour Party still the right party for you to be voting for?
Because they have beliefs that I believe in. They put back into the community. They are passionate about their communities and local schools, and it's just, they are everything that I believe in and my family believe in. They have morals.
The words that you said earlier were working class. This is a working class community.
Yeah.
Is Labour still a working class party in your mind?
Yes, very much so. Yes, they believe in. They just believe in the people, and they work for the people, and they believe in their people.
So you're pretty much convinced, so it doesn't really matter what happens at the Labour Party conference, you're probably going to stick with them. And what really matters is Rachel, because Rachel, you're a Conservative voter, and you've never voted for the Labour Party, but this might be the time that you would certainly consider it. Consider it being the key word.
Yes, I've been a Tory supporter all my life, been brought up with a family from always voting Conservative, and in the earthquake of politics that's happened in this last week, it really makes you realise what's going to happen next. Is this a good thing for this country to go through so many changes, so many things happening with tax, national insurance, and you just got to look around this area and people will not be really, they'll be just wondering about what's going to happen next. And we want people to continue to come shopping, we want people to continue to come and buy coffee and come to have a coffee and sit down and talk to people. If there's all this happening with the politics with the Tories, it does make me wonder, is there another alternative that we could be looking at? And I am afraid I might have to have a little reconsider.
Considering the options. We won't say that you might turn to the Labour Party, but we say that you might consider. One of the other parties is the Ashfield Independents. People vote for independence here. So people are certainly looking at different parties. It's not necessarily a place where people will always vote for the same party. If you were to vote for Labour, what would Labour really need to do? What would you need to hear from them in this Labour Party conference about energy, about the economy? What would convince you from being a lifelong Tory voter to being a first-time Labour voter?
Trust, stability, and making sure that there's continuation in the community, that we can rely on them for support and trust and credibility.
And you've got your neighbour here who's always voted Labour. You must speak to people all of the time who decided to turn from Labour. Do people feel that they're disassociated with just the Labour Party, or is it politics in general that people are disassociated with in Ashfield?
I think politics at the moment is a sore subject for a lot of people because they are just fed up of hearing on the news the tsunami of just everything that's happening at the moment. And I think just people just want to know how they're going to pay the next bill, who's going to help them, and if it can be a Labour government that's going to be more supportive, that's fantastic. I do hope the Tories can continue, but at the moment, the economic tsunami that we're having, it just seems that a lot of people are getting a little bit fed up with politics in general.
Rachel and Paige, thank you so much. We'll come and get a coffee from you. We'll come and get a watch from you later because I'm awful at telling the time. Just to give you an idea, this is the heart of Ashfield, but whether this could ever be a Labour heartland again, we will have to wait and see.
Well, thank you again there from Ashfield, speaking to business owners and Labour voters and Conservative voters, talking about whether they might change their minds after this conference.
Yeah, I think it's all up for grabs, and in that way it makes an exciting upcoming election where the politicians actually have to win the argument and not just expect voters to fall in tribal lines.
Yes, well, we're going to go to your views as promised. Earlier, about half an hour ago, we were speaking about a Canadian teacher who essentially has gone into school wearing these massive prosthetic breasts. Yes, prosthetic breasts.
They might even be inflatable.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how...
They're just enormous.
Otherwise, they'd be very heavy. But the point is, the school... He's basically said, you know, I'm transgender, I have a right to wear these huge prosthetic breasts. And the school has said, well, look, we offer an open and inclusive environment, a working environment, so they've effectively let this man wear these giant prosthetic breasts whilst teaching. So that's what we were talking about earlier. Lots of you getting in touch with your views on this.
Yes, well, Margaret says anyone who uses children as part of their perverted sexual fantasies is a child abuser. And, you know, it might be strong words, but I do think it is fair to say, you know, and as a society, I think we should be able to say that when someone is parading themselves in that way in the context of a classroom without the consent of children is a very morally dubious character, and I have no problem saying that.
Yeah, well, without the consent of their parents in particular, because in a lot of these cases, the parents aren't actually told when the school is allowing transgender ideology to run rampant in their classrooms. Lots of you actually getting in touch and saying that you've seen some rumours online that actually this person is a troll and is essentially doing it to call out the school's ridiculous policy and saying, well, if you have this ridiculous policy, I'm going to sort of dress up as ridiculously as I possibly can and then sue you for discrimination. We don't know whether that's true necessarily. Yeah. So, it could be a genuine... The world we live in is that there could genuinely be a man wearing massive prosthetic breasts teaching in a children's classroom. That could be real.
We've got to, where you don't even know sometimes if it is a troll or not, because when you have an ideology that essentially says whatever I feel, that is what I am, and anyone that disagrees with me is a bigot and then potentially should be criminalised, which in some cases actually happens in Canada, you don't always know. But the more worrying thing, as we talked about in the break, is actually the fact that the school has defended this individual, saying that their gender identity and expression is protected. So apparently wearing what I would say is pornographic representations of women in a classroom is an identity worth protecting.
Yeah, and I really hope... I mean, this is in Canada, so it's fair to say Canada is very, very liberal of late, probably more so than America in most instances when it comes to this kind of thing. Let's hope that our politicians have far more sense. I would never let this kind of thing run rampant in our schools. I don't think there's any justification for it whatsoever. Karen says, dear Mercy, I'm all for everyone identifying with whatever gender they identify with, but I don't need it rammed down my throat. I'm sure those kids don't need to either. Graham says, dear GB News, Miranda Yardley, who is the trans and human rights activist we had on to discuss this, he said Miranda Yardley is such a lovely trans lady and human rights activist. She's sensible, and I felt the need to say this as I'm not generally against transgender. The problem lies with those extremely vocal trans extremists.
And many people just sharing very similar sentiments. There seems to be a broad agreement that this is unacceptable, and many people rightfully questioning what happened to the safeguarding of children.
It doesn't exist anymore. That's what happened.
Exactly. Gender ideology now takes precedent over child safeguarding, and I don't think that could lead anywhere positive, to say the least.
Yes, indeed. Well, keep your views coming in, gbviews@gbnews.uk. And on a somewhat related story, because there's a politician in Italy who has been particularly vocal about things like this, and she's from Italy's Democratic Party. She's against Italy's Democratic Party, who have conceded defeat in the country's election following a shock exit poll. She's from the party Brothers of Italy, and she won more than a quarter of the votes, and very well could be Italy's next Prime Minister, their first female Prime Minister, but she is being called far right, mainly because she stands up very strongly for things like this and other reasons. So after the break, we're going to discuss whether the tag far right is really justified when it comes to Italy's potential next Prime Minister. More on that after the break.
Alex Deacon here with your latest weather updates. A mixture of sunshine and showers today, but it is pretty fresh out there. Cold wind coming in from the north. That's been developing through the night thanks to a big area of low pressure. The wind's swinging in and pushing away this weather fronts, and as I say, bringing that chilly feel, but also bringing a mixture of sunshine and showers. The showers plentiful across northern Scotland. We'll also continue to see some coming in across parts of North Wales, drifting down into the Midlands, perhaps one or two getting to the southeast. Southwest England seeing a scattering of showers as well, and also along the east coast. Many other areas, though, in between, not seeing many showers at all and staying largely dry and bright. But even when the sun's out, it is not warm. Temperatures a touch below average, and it feels colder, particularly if you're exposed to that northerly wind, which will continue to blow through the evening and overnight and continue to bring a sprinkling of showers down, particularly through the Irish Sea into Liverpool Bay area, across much of Wales and parts of southwest England. The more eastern parts of Northern Ireland and northern Scotland. Again, down the eastern side, not too many showers, many places dry. That breeze helping to keep the temperatures up, but still getting well down into single figures in the countryside and feeling very fresh once more on Tuesday morning. A whole host of showers at this stage coming into parts of northwest England, North Wales, and some of them will filter down into the Midlands, the odd one getting into East Anglia and the southeast. Plenty of showers across northern Scotland. Thicker cloud across Pembrokeshire, Devon and Cornwall. Could be quite a damp afternoon across Cornwall in particular, with persistent rain here. Again, temperatures below average and feeling cooler with the wind, although the wind's perhaps easing a touch tomorrow compared to today, but still feeding in some showers into parts of North Wales. We'll see a few more getting into the eastern side as we head into Wednesday morning. The rain in the southwest also becoming a little more extensive overnight before clearing away on Wednesday. Sunny spells and a few showers Wednesday, Thursday. Could see some wet and windy weather swing across on Friday.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
To each and every one of you
for helping our great nation
find its voice
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England,
Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
On TV,
on radio, and online.
We're proud to be
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flock at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
morning. The time's 11:28, and this is To The Point with Inaya Falarid Iman and Mercy Moroki on GB News. We're live on your TV, online and radio.
Indeed. Well, Italy's Democratic Party has conceded defeat in the country's election following a shock exit poll result which saw the populist right party, Brothers of Italy, winning more than a quarter of the vote at over 25%, compared to the Democratic Party's 19%.
Yes, well, Giorgia Meloni, the leader of Brothers of Italy, said Italian voters had given a clear mandate to the right to form the next government.
Well, if she becomes Prime Minister, Giorgia Meloni would be Italy's first female Prime Minister, and also some commentators are saying that she would be the country's first far-right politician to lead since Mussolini.
Yes, well, let's speak to academic and Professor of Politics at the University of Kent, Matt Goodwin. Good morning. I mean, the first question to ask you is these reports, these accusations that she's incredibly far-right, are they justified? Is there any truth to them?
Well, Giorgia Meloni's party certainly is rooted in what we often call the post-fascist tradition. So it does hold its roots in the movement led by Mussolini. Meloni has distanced herself from some of the comments that have been made by Italy's interwar leader. She does take a tough line on immigration. She's quite sceptical of the European Union, though she's not calling to leave the EU. She's very critical of illegal migration. So all of that, I think, has led many of her critics to refer to her as far right. I would personally argue that she's probably a radical right politician, an ultra-conservative politician who is also quite critical of many of the mainstream positions on issues like gender, the criticism of religion, the criticism of the family, of national identity. And that's really why she's been able to put together this support. She's drawn support from across the spectrum, from sort of conservative voters, from former League voters, from some five-star populist voters, and that's what's really given her this very powerful position.
And Professor Goodwin, I mean, isn't this part of the problem with this labelling of the far right? Because, I mean, you see you've had the Swedish Democrats, also Orban in Hungary. Whatever people's personal disagreements with those parties, is it not the way in which certain parties are demonised and ignored that means that many Western observers on the Liberal side are completely dumbfounded when the results don't reflect their own prejudices and assumptions? And isn't that part of the problem, this labelling, without actually understanding what is going on, what are the problems, and taking them seriously?
I think that is part of the problem. I think if you look at how liberals have responded ever since 2016, those shock revolts with Trump and Brexit, my personal view is liberals have responded very poorly to that. They've not really addressed the reasons why so many people have been leaving the mainstream. They've talked a lot about kind of misinformation and threats to democracy, but they haven't, in my view, addressed people's very widespread concerns about issues to do with the erosion of national borders, the erosion of established identities. And, you know, when we talk about terms such as far right or fascist, the reality is that in most Western democracies today, those terms really don't actually take us very far in understanding these parties. Most parties that we often refer to, perhaps more so as national populist, accept that they need to work within the boundaries of democracy. They accept they need to work within the boundaries of the capitalist system. Most, like Meloni, are not calling to leave the European Union. Most, like Marine Le Pen, have also toned down their Euroscepticism. So we're not talking about revolutionary parties that want to overthrow the system. And that is a really important difference from what we saw in interwar Europe. Those parties were genuinely revolutionary. They wanted to overthrow democracy. They wanted to overthrow liberalism. They just didn't recognize the established system in any sense. That's not what we're dealing with today. They are certainly sometimes reactionary parties. They want a much tougher approach on migration, on crime. They want to defend the family. They're very opposed to gender identity and those things, but they're not revolutionary in the sense that they want to completely overthrow the entire system.
Well, Professor Matt Goodwin, thank you so much for giving us that analysis. Clears up a lot. I think the bottom line is maybe to take this far-right label that is being put on her with a pinch of salt, because lots of people are accused of being far-right these days for what, having views that a lot of people actually hold, which are just conservative views.
Well, I think that's a very strong point. I mean, a traditional Christian nowadays who believes in, certain ideas about the family, about, sexual relations and so on, you may fundamentally disagree with them, but to label those views far right, I just don't think is accurate at all, and I think does a lot more harm than good.
Yes, well, get your views in, gbviews@gbnews.uk, but for now, we're just going to give you a quick update on the headlines with Rosie.
Good morning, it's 11:34. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date on GB News. The pound slumped to a record low against the dollar, plunging towards parity this morning after the government unveiled its plan to cut taxes. Sterling fell by more than 4% to just $1.03 in early trading before regaining some ground. Experts are warning goods could become even more expensive, exacerbating the cost of living crisis. The Chancellor's hinting that more tax cuts could be on the way. Labour has accused the government of helping higher earners and recklessly gambling with the UK's finances. But the Work and Pensions Secretary, Chloe Smith, told GB News it's a good plan and growing the economy will take time.
What you saw in the growth package from the Chancellor last Friday is a really bold and ambitious plan that is all about growth, and I think that's exactly right. And for me, in my particular role, what I'm most focused on is using all of those levers to help people into jobs, and that, I think, is what we all want to see.
Now, at least 5 police officers were seriously injured. 12 people were arrested following violent disorder near the Iranian Embassy in London last night. Rival groups clashed at a protest calling for an end to the Islamic Republic of Iran. It was sparked by the death of 22-year-old Masha Amini, who died in custody in Tehran after being arrested for not completely covering her hair. In Italy now, and the far-right party Brothers of Italy is projected to win the Italian election with 26% of the vote, leaving the way clear for a right-wing alliance. Their leader, Giorgia Meloni, will become the country's first female prime minister. She's now calling for unity to help the country face issues, including surging energy. We're on your TV, online and DAB+ radio. This is GB News. Well, here's a quick snapshot then of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.070 and €1.109. The price of gold currently stands at £1,532.56 per ounce.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
To each and every one of you.
For helping our great nation
Find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England,
Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland.
On TV,
on radio and online.
We're proud to be
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flock at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Welcome back. It's 11:38. This is To The Point on GB News with me, Anaya Falarin Iman and Mercy Maroki. We're live on your TV, online and radio.
Yes. Now, to house prices, because the average price tag on a home has increased by over £2,500 or 0.7% month on month in September. That's according to property website Rightmove.
And across Britain, the average asking price of a property coming into market this year is £367,000. On Thursday last week, the Bank of England base rate was increased from 1.75% to 2.25%, pushing up costs for some mortgage borrowers on variable rates.
Yes, and now with the mini budget, or the so-called mini budget, announcing that stamp duty will be cut, is this good news for buyers and bad news for sellers, or what should we make of all of this?
Yeah, well, let's speak now to Director of Policy and External Affairs at Chartered Institute of Housing, James Prestwich. Thank you for joining us on the programme. You're at the Labour Party conference. Tell us how the mini budget will affect buyers and sellers.
What today has really outlined is that we're dealing with the midst of a housing crisis. We haven't built the homes that the country needs for some considerable time now. So what we saw in the budget were some demand-side issues, some demand-side solutions such as stamp duty, cut and stamp duty. I think the problem with that is, of course, that's likely to have some further inflationary pressures on a housing market that is already overheating. What the mini budget didn't address was the supply side thing, which is we aren't building enough homes.
That all makes sense. And that is almost looking at it in the long term. But what about people who, in the short term, in the immediate term, are perhaps looking to buy a house, or they're on a mortgage and their fixed rate is coming to an end? How should those people be feeling? Because it is mixed, isn't it? On one hand, there are those changes to stamp duty, which will mean they won't have to pay as much. But on the other hand, interest rates are rising, which will affect people on those tracker mortgages.
Yeah, I think the interest rate situation is one that we certainly need to watch, and we certainly need to be mindful of. So people often draw a comparison between where interest rates are now to where they were in the late 80s, early 90s, when they were 14-15%. The difference now to then is that the link between average earnings and average house prices is completely broken. In addition, we've taken on a lot more household debt too, so a smaller increase in interest rates has quite a significant impact on those who are already paying mortgages. And as you rightly said, when people start to drop off their fixed rate and look to negotiate a new mortgage, that's going to present some particular challenges. It looks as though, through the economic policies that the government have outlined in their mini budget, as though interest rates are only likely to go one way, and that's likely to be up. So I think it's one for us to be cautious and careful of, and for homeowners to be particularly mindful of as they think about budgeting.
Yeah, can I just ask very quickly, what if somebody is planning on buying a house or moving at the moment, what would you be saying to those people right now?
I mean, I wouldn't want to try and answer that one. It's clearly dependent on the individual circumstances that people find themselves in. We have an overheated housing market. We have incredibly expensive housing market, and people have to make very tough decisions for themselves when they choose whether they're able to step onto the housing ladder. The rise in interest rates will just make those decisions tougher for people, I think, as they start to think about, are we really going to be able to afford it? And that, of course, is if someone is able to have saved up to have a deposit in the first place, which is another really important issue here.
Thank you so much, James Prestwich, Director of Policy and External Affairs at Chartered Institute of Housing. Thank you for joining us on the programme.
Yes, and now to our final story. New figures reveal that electric car drivers exclusively using rapid or ultra-rapid public chargers pay around 18p per mile for electricity, but this is compared to roughly 19p per mile for petrol and 21p per mile for diesel, so only 1 or 2 to 3 pence more expensive if you're actually using fuel.
Yeah, so not much difference there. And according to the RAC, the cost of charging an electric car using public charging points on a pay-as-you-go basis has risen by 42% in just 4 months.
Yes, well, joining us now is Howard Cox, founder of Fair Fuel UK. Welcome to the programme. Help me understand why this has happened, because we've been told for years, haven't we, that we're all supposed to be moving our to electric, and we've been told repeatedly it's guaranteed to be cheaper for consumers. What's happened?
Well, thank you for having me on your show. The fundamentally, what we're seeing is the shine of electric vehicles is now disappearing. It is not so environmentally friendly. They're not so cheaper than normal. Don't forget, diesel and petrol is taxed. We're the highest tax drivers in the world, but electric vehicles aren't even taxed. So if you actually did a true comparison, electric vehicles would be ridiculously more expensive. EVs are wonderful if you can charge at home, but and not drive more than about 50 to 100 miles around your own house, your own residence. But if you're going for long journeys, public charging points now are becoming ridiculously expensive, and it's going to get worse. It's not going to get better.
I mean, do you think that the dial is shifting on this question then? Do you think that more people are actually questioning whether or not some of the green things that have been touted over the last few years are actually meeting the needs that people have?
Well, it is. No government has had a proper joined-up road transport user, a road user transport strategy. And it is right we move to cleaner fuels. I'm not fighting that situation, but we shouldn't be forced into a mode of transport that isn't actually proven. And really, at the moment, from cradle to grave, an electric vehicle versus a fossil fuel vehicle is hardly any difference between the emissions that comes out of either of these types of vehicles. And yes, you're right, the shine is coming off it. But the problem we have got at the moment is that the government, like, if you remember on Friday, we had that mini budget. We had hoped for a fuel duty cut, because that would be the quickest way to reduce inflation and the impact of the cost of living crisis. They didn't do that. We don't understand that. And I spoke to Liz Truss during her election campaign, her leadership election campaign, and she said, don't worry, we're going to be on the side of drivers. But we're not seeing that at the moment. And the electric vehicle thing is adding to the confusion.
Is it now the case that there's really not a cheap way to drive these days? Because there was, people were left with hope, essentially, that if they switched to electric, then they could reduce their long-term bills for driving. But it all just seems to be completely expensive now, whether you're using diesel, whether you're using petrol or electric. So where does that leave motorists?
Well, in a difficult situation, but the important thing for this government is actually not tell us what to drive. Let's drive based on the actual merits of the vehicles. If electric vehicles are so good and they're wonderful, why didn't they stand up and why did the government decide to put in a ban on new diesel, new petrols, the sales of in 2030? What if they just allowed the natural clean energy or clean fuel energy development to continue? We'd be probably have hydrogen, and we'd probably have what's called Euro 7 diesel, which is very clean, etc., and electric vehicles working alongside of everything. But this government doesn't have a clue, and they're still very anti-car. Boris Johnson was one of the most anti-driver, anti-car administrations in living history. And unfortunately, you quite rightly point out, the choice of what to do is based on, in terms of expense. We can't really use that approach because, for example, there's a plumber friend of mine who's just wanted to buy a new white van, and he looked at a Berlingo electric vehicle. It's £37,000, but the diesel version is £26,000, £11,000 cheaper. Where's the incentive going on here to actually get people to actually move to cleaner fuels when you've got to pay £11,000 more for that privilege?
I mean, so what do you think the government could do now in order to kind of respond to some of the concerns you're raising? Oh, it seems we may have lost.
Have we got Howard? Yes, we have. We've got him back.
We lost you for a second.
You briefly transitioned into our royal reporter Cameron Walker, but it's 2022. You can transition into anything these days. But please carry on making your point.
Yeah, exactly. What the government can do is there's two major things we've been calling for. And I've got a lot of backbench support for this. It's one, we need to cut the cost of motoring because that would reduce the cost of the living crisis and reduce inflation. We had a 0.3% reduction in August in terms of inflation, and that is due to the fact that pump prices have come down by 10 pence. So it works. That logic, it follows through. And the other thing is we've got to stop this opportunistic profiteering in the fuel supply chain. Pump prices at the moment are about 20p more than they should be. And unfortunately, the government's allowing the fuel supply chain, further up the fuel supply chain, not the small independent garages, to get away with actually basically exploiting drivers at every opportunity when we fill up. So that's what we want to see. And let's sit down the table and talk about what's the cleanest fuel to use long term, and don't push us into these cliff edge bans without consultation.
Well, Howard, thank you so much for joining us this morning to discuss that. Do come back another time. Howard Cox there, founder of Fair Fuel UK.
Yes, and now a further week of mourning for the Queen held by the royal family ends today following her state funeral on the 19th of September.
Yes, well, last week, King Charles III he was decreed on 9th of September, which was the day after the Queen died, decreed that there'd be a period of mourning observed until 7 days after the funeral for the royal family in particular. We can now speak to our royal reporter, Cameron Walker. Cameron, so just explain this a bit to us. So the official period of mourning for the royal family ended 7 days after the national period of mourning, is that right?
Yes, that's essentially right, Mercy. The national mourning period ended after the funeral last week, and royal mourning has continued in this week that we've just had, and it ends today. And then at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning, the flags above royal residences will raise from their current position at half-mast to full mast again, and we will perhaps see more members of the royal family carry out more engagements, although they did do a few last week. I'm just going to pan across here to these two Shire horses which are just left. This is Heath and Nobby. They are both senior greys, aged 17 and 14 years old. They stand at 18.3 hands high, and they are pulling this flatbed of all the flowers which have been laid from here at Green Park, where I'm stood, and at Hyde Park in tribute to Her Majesty the Queen by members of the public. Now, these flowers, of course, because royal mourning has ended, are going to be taken from here to Kensington Gardens, where they're going to be turned into compost for next spring's kind of planting that's going to be happening in all the royal parks across London. So all these flowers which have been left are going to have a new lease of life following the death of Her Majesty the Queen. And the flatbed was pulled as a traditional working dray used in conservation work across the royal park. So it's something which happens kind of all the time. You can see volunteers behind me separating the flowers from the paper, from the cards, from the Paddington Bears which have been left to honour Her Majesty the Queen, and they'll continue this until it's done, which could take a good week.
Well, thank you, Cameron, for that update there from Green Park in London. I think it's lovely that you mentioned there that those flowers will be used as compost for the parks next spring.
No, that is lovely, and that's perhaps a message of growth and rejuvenation.
Yeah.
Well, in the last few minutes of the show, we're going to now bring you some of the views that you've been sending in on the range of different topics that we've been talking about. The Iran protests, which we have been revisiting throughout the show. Many people are saying how just shocked and in awe, really, of the bravery and courage of many of the women that are also protesting. Paul says, at the Iranian Embassy, it's just Iranians expressing their anger, or nothing to do with orchestration, like the police say, and what the London mayor says. I mean, that is interesting. I mean, it does seem that there was some agitators there that may have actually been on the pro-Iranian regime side, so I think that's something that should be looked into further.
Yes, absolutely. Well, we've, of course, been bringing you the news all morning that the pound did fall to its lowest value ever against the dollar. The US dollar, Dave says here, trying to put a positive spin on the falling in the value of the pound against other currencies. I wonder, are we likely to see an increase in visitors or tourists to the UK as a result? If this is so, this would at least be some benefit. And lots of you pointing out that there are two sides to the coin, excuse the pun, when the pound or any coin, any currency, plummets, if that's the word you want to use, it means the dollar becomes stronger, and that has its benefits. So there you go. But lots to come on that across the channel. GB News will be bringing you all the updates from Labour Party conference as well. But that is it from us here at To The Point. We're going to be back tomorrow, but don't go away, because up next is GB News Day with Mark and Gloria.
Alex Deacon here with your latest weather updates. A mixture of sunshine and showers today, but it is pretty fresh out there. A cold wind coming in from the north. That's been developing through the night thanks to a big area of low pressure. The wind's swinging in and pushing away this weather front. And as I say, bringing that chilly feel, but also bringing a mixture of sunshine and showers. The showers plentiful across northern Scotland. We'll also continue to see some coming in across parts of North Wales, drifting down into the Midlands, perhaps one or two getting to the southeast. Southwest England seeing a scattering of showers as well, and also along the east coast. Many other areas, though, in between, not seeing many showers at all and staying largely dry and bright. But even when the sun's out, it is not warm. Temperatures a touch below average, and it feels colder, particularly if you're exposed to that northerly wind, which will continue to blow through the evening and overnight and continue to bring a sprinkling of showers down, particularly through the Irish Sea into Liverpool Bay area, across much of Wales and parts of southwest England, the more eastern parts of Northern Ireland and northern Scotland. Again, down the eastern side, not too many showers, many places dry. That breeze helping to keep the temperatures up, but still getting well down into single figures in the countryside and feeling very fresh once more on Tuesday morning. A whole host of showers at this stage coming into parts of northwest England, North Wales, and some of them will filter down into the Midlands, the odd one getting into East Anglia and the southeast. Plenty of showers across northern Scotland. Thicker cloud across Pembrokeshire, Devon and Cornwall. Could be quite a damp afternoon across Cornwall in particular, with persistent rain here. Again, temperatures below average and feeling cooler with the wind, although the wind's perhaps easing a touch tomorrow compared to today, but still feeding in some showers into parts of North Wales. We'll see a few more getting into the eastern side as we head into Wednesday morning. The rain in the southwest also becoming a little more extensive overnight before clearing away on Wednesday. Sunny spells and a few showers Wednesday, Thursday. Could see some wet and windy weather swing across on Friday.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
To each and every one of you.
For helping our great nation
Find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England, Scotland,
Wales and Northern Ireland.
On TV.
on radio and online.
We're proud to be
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flock at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Hello and welcome to GB News Day. Well, with the financial storm gathering over the government's economic plans and with the pound plunging, now expectations to interest rates could soar higher and faster.